Patek Philippe is the last family-owned Geneva watch manufacturer. After being the 170 years old exclusive timepiece company, its heritage is clearly reflected in its unique marketing slogan. You never actually own a Patek Philippe. You merely look after it for the next generation. These iconic words encapsulate the entire history of the company and define the quality of its products. And as if that's not enough to make Patek Philippe an outstanding brand among the top watchmakers, it was founded by the unlikeliest of people, a Polish refugee. But how exactly did one man revolutionize the Swiss watch market? And why is it the only privately owned watch manufacturing company to date? You don't know? Well, then stick around, because today we are diving into the fascinating history of Patek Philippe. Antoni Norbert Patek was born more than 200 years ago, on June 14, 1812, on his family's estate in Piaski Śląski, a small village on the east side of Poland. When Antoni was only 10, his family moved to Warsaw, and when his father Joachim died 5 years later, the boy had to take responsibility for his family. But along with his duties to his family, Patek also felt he had a duty to his motherland. Poland at the time was occupied by Russian forces, so the only way he found an outlet for his patriotism was by joining a resistance movement.
Do the Russians really hate us that much?
Aged only 15, Patek joined the 1st Polish Mounted Rifles Regiment, but it wasn't until 2 years later that he would see any real fighting in what would be known as the November Uprising of 1830. Patek was promoted to the rank of 2nd lieutenant and was later decorated with the Virtuti Militari Golden Cross for his bravery on the battlefield. Unfortunately, the November Uprising was defeated, and the following repression and subversion by the victorious Russians were harsh. Patek, like many other Polish soldiers and officers, was forced to leave behind the country he had risked everything for. However, owing to his bravery and commitment to the cause, Patek was given one more mission. He had to organize a secure evacuation route for Polish insurgents through Prussia to France. During the mission, he was given command over a strategic staging point in Bamberg near Munich. But when the evacuation was successfully over, Patek settled in France, making a living as a typesetter.
He's a typesetter.
But Patek's exile in France did not last long, because after 2 years, the French government, under pressure from the Russians, decided to resettle former Polish insurgents in Switzerland, including Patek. There, Patek tried his hands at many trades while at the same time taking lessons from the renowned Swiss painter and engraver Alexandra Callum. It was also during this time that Patek began to develop a taste for beautifully intricate objects. This would, no doubt, have significant implications for him later in life. As he settled into Swiss life in Geneva, Patek started to buy the mechanisms of watches from the best Geneva watchmakers and put them into cases. He was extremely demanding when it came to the quality of workmanship and artistry that went into the cases, and he also found that there was a growing market for his creations. With a stroke of good fortune, Patek became acquainted with Franciszek Czapek, another Polish immigrant of Czech. The two exchanged stories of their passions for watchmaking and found an opportunity lurking in Genevan society. They realized that the local population was appreciative of good art and that an ornate timepiece would be the ideal way to fill that void.
Think of it as an opportunity.
Why a timepiece? Firstly, pocket watches were an essential part of Swiss attire, and owing to people's busy lives, almost everybody carried a timepiece with them. This established a strong customer base. And secondly, the watch cases could easily be decorated to depict scenes with religious or nationalistic overtones, thus satisfying the Swiss craving for art. It was an elaborate scheme. So, on the 1st of May, 1839, Patek teamed up with Franciszek Czapek, and together the two established their watchmaking firm, Patek Czapek and Cie. This would mark the beginning of Patek's lasting legacy.
Well, that's not a bad legacy to leave.
Having no venture capitalists to invest in the company, the business was financially supported by its workers, who spent money from their own pockets to keep up with expenses. The company employed a half a dozen workers and initially only produced pocket watches on individual order, of which they would receive 200 or so throughout the year. Each watch was crafted with a degree of perfection, and Patek would never compromise on the quality of his product. As per demand, the artistic tones of their watches were at the time deeply rooted in Polish nationalism and often depicted Polish revolutionary heroes, or the Black Madonna of Częstochowa, which was essentially a nuanced portrayal of baby Jesus and the Virgin Mary. The union of artistic appeal and technical mastery was the hallmark signature of Patek, Czapek and Cie.
That craftsmanship, Norman.
But despite the growing success of the company in the Swiss market, there was a deep-seated discord among its two founders. By 1845, Patek and Czapek's paths separated, but it was never clear what the disagreement was about. While Czapek would go on to form his own watchmaking company, Patek had to make do with whatever was left of his company. This meant that Patek was once again on the lookout for a new partner, and while visiting the French Industrial Exposition of 1944 at Champs-Élysées in Paris, it seemed that he had found the ideal business partner. At the exposition, he met the gifted watchmaker, Adrien Philippe. Jean was tinkering with ideas and eventually became the man who invented the revolutionary keyless winding mechanism. This meant that pocket watches could be wound without requiring a separate key. And by displaying this patented invention at the French Industrial Exposition, he was awarded a bronze medal by Louis Philippe himself. He was the King of France at the time.
Harold Lee, I would like to introduce you to an invention of mine.
This also caught the eye of Patek, who, a year later, would end his partnership with Francisek Czapek and would make Jean the technical director of his team. Together with a third partner, Vincent Goskowski, they founded a new company under the name Patek Philippe and Cie. The new company was officially established in 1851. And in the same year, at London's Great Exhibition, Queen Victoria gave the rising company an elevated position in the history of watchmaking when she bought an open-faced keyless winding watch. Victoria regarded the beauty of the watch so highly that she wore it as a piece of jewelry, and Patek was nicknamed the Royal Watchmaker. Ever since then, the list of the famous who have fallen in love with Patek watches has grown and grown. After Queen Victoria, it was Tsar Nicholas II, who became an obsessive collector, and then came along others: Lev Tolstoy, Tchaikovsky, Albert Einstein, Walt Disney, and Pablo Picasso.
Picasso.
Using a blend of Patek's love for artistic perfection and Jean-Philippe's uncompromising attitude towards the standard of clockwork, the two made the company a hallmark success over the next 2 decades. Unfortunately, Patek had long been suffering from anemia and passed away in 1877 at the age of 65. Patek's son, Léon, was only 20 at the time, and since he didn't want to join the company, he sold all of his rights to the business to the other shareholders for an annual payment of 10,000 francs. In the years following Patek's death, the company continued to establish its name in the world by participating in numerous exhibits around the world. One of their most lucrative partnerships during this time was with Gondolo and Laborio of Rio de Janeiro. The partnership lasted for nearly half a century and carried Patek Philippe and Cie through some very tumultuous times.
Tough times. People losing everything.
When Europe was facing the wrath of the Franco-Prussian War, the demand for ornate timekeeping devices was at a record low. It was during this time that Gondolo and Laborio helped keep the company afloat by retailing nearly a third of all their production. However, Jean-Philippe only lived to see 2 fruitful decades of their partnership as he passed away in 1892. 2 years prior, he had already handed his position in the company over to his son, Joseph Philippe, who then gave his position to his son, Adrien. Adrien would be the last person with either a Patek or Philippe family name to run the company. This was problematic because it essentially meant that no one would pursue the company's goals of achieving harmony between art and utility in their products wholeheartedly.
Very problematic.
To make matters worse, by 1932, the business had become financially distressed because of the global economic crisis that came about because of the Great Depression. They desperately needed a buyer because as the stock market plummeted, most of their shareholders were defaulting on their payments. To keep the company on its feet, they contacted the brothers, Charles and Jean Stair, as the owners of Caudron Stair Frères, the eminent watch dial producers in Europe. They were no strangers to the watch manufacturing industry. To preserve Swiss watchmaking traditions and exploit a business opportunity, the brothers took a stake in Patek Philippe and Cie in 1932 and had wholly acquired it by the following year. The two got to work immediately, and before the end of 1932, they had launched Reference 96, their most iconic timepiece.
It's an icon, right?
The Stair brothers had run the company's operations with such skill that business ran smoothly for 2 generations. The next major hurdle for the company would challenge Stair's grandson, Philippe. Philippe joined the company in 1966, and because of his family traditions, he was acutely aware of the watchmaking tradition in Geneva and modern trends in timepiece fashion. However, there was a surge of technological developments which moved faster than the company's ability to adapt to it. Just like Rolex and other Swiss watchmakers, Patek Philippe would soon be facing the heat of the Quartz Crisis. In the 1970s and 80s, the watch industry was revolutionized by piezoelectric quartz crystals. The dilemma was that quartz watches were battery-powered, and there was no need for mechanical mechanisms to run dials. Because quartz watches were more precise and cost less to manufacture, these cheap alternatives began to flood the market, and their proliferation decimated the Swiss watch industry.
It's ticking like a Swiss watch.
Philippe knew that for mechanical watches to stand out in the market, they would have to be a very high-end product. The commitment to artisanship would be preserved, but the watches would now be designed based on preset blueprints. This would not only improve quality, but also assure reproducibility and guarantee that Patek Philippe could repair all of its watches. For Philippe, upholding tradition never meant rejecting innovation. Today, Patek Philippe is regarded as one of the most prestigious watchmaking names, and all around the world, people are familiar with the brand as a fine producer of mechanical timepieces. The company has had its roots established almost 200 years ago, and even today still stands as a hallmark of craftsmanship and ingenuity.
I'm a genius, what can I say?
Even though they can boast that their clientele comprises Queen Victoria, they usually avoid celebrity endorsements. At Patek Philippe, they would probably say that the word own should be taken into context, because as we mentioned before, their motto is, you never actually own a Patek Philippe, you merely look after it for the next generation. And this motto also is a testament to the nature of the company. Patek Philippe prides itself on being the last independent watchmaker in Geneva, and ever since 1932, the company has securely been in the hands of the Stair family. This way, the business can fulfill its destiny and carry out its age-long tradition of delivering opulent timekeeping devices. Do you own a Patek Philippe, or are you more of a Rolex person? What surprised you most about the brand's fascinating history? Let us know in the comments below. If you found this video entertaining or learned something new, please leave a like and tell us what you'd like to see next. Also, don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell on your way out so you won't miss out on our next inspiring video. Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you again soon.